Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. If you could do me a quick favor, see that little subscribe button at the bottom of your screen? Go ahead, click that subscribe button. Really does help our channel grow, our audience grow, and I really do appreciate it more than you know. So click that subscribe button. Appreciate your support. Now, here's the video that you came here for. Obviously, we just talked about the latest with Nick Saban. He's okay. He spoke to Reese Davis and Chris Lowe on Thursday. Everything is fine health-wise. So now that we know that Nick Saban's okay, thank goodness. Can't lose Nick Saban. He's all we got left. Protect him at all costs. It is time, though, now that we know that he's good, to talk about seriously who is going to replace this guy. He's a living legend, but Alabama is also a great coaching job. And on Wednesday's live reaction, we did talk a little bit about who's next, but now it's Thursday. And now we've got some real tangible information about who's a legitimate candidate, who's not. Some of the guys we talked about, it feels like we're trending the wrong direction. But one thing we do know, Greg Byrne has had a list of names in his desk forever. And he's been planning for this day, and he knows who he wants. And on Thursday, we got a lot of very interesting information about this coaching search. First off, I would argue the single most important piece of news that we got on Thursday is one guy that is definitively not going to get the job. And it's the guy that I would have made my first phone call to, Dan Lanning, the head coach at Oregon. And it was funny because as soon as I logged off of that live reaction show on Wednesday night, you start seeing the reports of Dan Lanning's on campus and Dan Lanning's already there. And I'll say this, I don't claim to have insight into every single thing that everybody is doing, but it felt weird. I don't think that Greg Byrne even knew that this was coming as of Wednesday afternoon. And so the idea, like this news shocked everybody. And I will say, like, I don't know Dan Lanning. I don't know Nick Saban. But I know enough people in college football circles where nobody saw this coming. So the idea that Dan Lanning was already on a plane to Tuscaloosa or in Tuscaloosa 2 hours after this news broke, there was just no way that it was true. Well, we found out definitively on Thursday morning because Dan Lanning did an announcement through his social media basically saying, I'm not going anywhere. As a matter of fact, he was on Pat McAfee. Apparently, he said that he was actually watching one of the Bourne movies with his son when his phone starts blowing up, when his son's phone starts blowing up. And the bottom line is he is staying at Oregon. And at this point, let me say a couple things about Dan Lanning before we get to the legitimate candidates. I do think it's time that we start taking Dan Lanning off of all these coaching carousel search lists, okay? I will say that I'm not claiming I know the guy. And I'm not saying that he'll never leave Oregon at all. But I do think we have to start kind of changing our brains as to what a good job in modern college football is. And I would argue Oregon is about as good as any of them. Now, is it better than Georgia? Is it better than LSU? I don't know. But what I do know is there isn't a single thing that the LSU coach has, that the Georgia coach has, that the Florida coach has, that the Ohio State coach has, that the Michigan coach has, that Dan Lanning can't get. Resources, facilities, finances, NIL, collective money. These are the things that matter in 2024. Do you have the right collective? Do you have the right donors behind you? Do you have the right infrastructure in place where if you need something, you can get it? I'll be quick here because I know you want to talk about other coaching candidates. But listen, I live in LA. USC 20 years ago was the best job on the West Coast. But USC donors, as of this moment, this second right now, they're not willing to put up the money that it takes to recruit at the level that you need to at the highest level. And so, yes, USC has a natural recruiting base that Oregon doesn't. But the stuff that matters, facilities, resources, NIL money, Oregon blows virtually everybody out of the water. And this is where I think Dan Lanning sees it. He says, I got a great thing going. By the way, all those other jobs that have there's no jobs that have more than me. But the jobs that have the same as me, the same money, the same collective, the same resources, the same facilities, they might even have a little bit more pressure, right? Because you think about Oregon. Oregon has everything that Ohio State and LSU and Texas has with like 1/100th of the pressure. Think about Ohio State. Ryan Day, people are legitimately saying, if Ryan Day loses to Michigan again next year and does not win the Big Ten, he might be fired. I don't think that's going to happen. But I bring it up because Ryan Day just went 11-2. Ryan Day 2 years ago went 11-2. Almost won a playoff game and played for a national championship last year. But I bring it up because that is what the pressure is at Ohio State, Georgia, LSU, Tennessee, whoever. It isn't that at Oregon. So I don't want to go any longer with Dan Lanning because there's other candidates to get to. I just don't buy him as a legitimate candidate for all but a few jobs. Now, maybe 3, 4, 5 years down the road, he hits a brick wall. Things aren't going as well at Oregon. It's different. But right now, this second, I think it's as good of a job as any in college football. For people who say there's no recruiting base, well, guess what? You don't need a recruiting base in the NIL portal world. Anyway, Dan Lanning is out. I'll say this too, as far as the Alabama job is concerned. Another name that seems to be trending in the other direction, it's Lane Kiffin. I've seen multiple people say Lane Kiffin's just not a legitimate candidate. I saw Greg McElroy, who obviously played there. He hosts a morning radio show with my buddy Cole Kublick every single day. I heard them talking about it on their show. Greg McElroy said Lane Kiffin is not a candidate. Chris Lowe was on with my buddy Ryan Fowler, said Lane Kiffin is not a candidate. And so it is interesting. Lane Kiffin's another one for the opposite of Dan Lanning that we may have to take him off the list of big time coaching jobs, because it feels like he gets linked with all these jobs. 2 years ago, he got linked with LSU and Florida and a couple others. And he was not a real candidate for those jobs. Maybe Auburn he was last year. But this year, Texas A&M, people try to link him. You talk to people at Texas A&M, he was never even in the conversation. And apparently he isn't at Alabama either. We can agree whether he's the right fit, whether he's the wrong fit. Is he too cocky or arrogant? Has he won big enough yet? I think he has. Is it the NCAA past? I don't know. Is there something about him that people that have worked with him just say, we're good? I don't know. But it feels like his name keeps getting brought up with all these big jobs, and it doesn't feel like those jobs want him. Now, in terms of the names that are starting to rise, so Lanning is out. Kiffin seems to be trending in the wrong direction. The names that are jumping up, there is a lot of Kalen DeBoer buzz a day into this coaching search. Thought it was interesting early in the day, the odds markets, offshore odds were trending towards Mike Norvell. We'll get to him in a minute from Florida State. But as the day went on, there's just more and more and more buzz about Kalen DeBoer. I think it's very interesting. One, Colin Cowherd, my buddy, he's very plugged in the agenting world. And he said, I talked to some people in that agent world, and this is a guy that Alabama has been vetting behind the scenes for months. Maybe not like the hardcore vet, but kind of just has an eye on him, learning more about him, this and that. I then saw on top of that some other reports linking him to the job. Chris Lowe, as I just mentioned, said that he was a legitimate candidate. I also saw Joel Klatt say that he believes that not only is Kalen DeBoer a candidate, Joel Klatt went so far as to say he would be shocked if Kalen DeBoer was not the next head coach at Alabama. So it shows you the buzz that this guy's starting to get. And I guess all I would say is it's a very interesting conversation. I think he's a great coach. I think he's super smart. I am so impressed by his scheme and his whatever, the ability to get everything out of Washington that he did. And I think there's no doubt, like anybody else, it'd be interesting to see him do it with more talent, a higher caliber of player, right? Like, no disrespect, but they just ran into a wall against Michigan the other night. They just weren't as good. But even, by the way, they beat Oregon twice this year, and I would argue Oregon's got better personnel. I don't think USC's personnel is significantly worse than Washington's, and Washington largely dominated them at the Coliseum. And so I bring it up because I would be so fascinated to see him walk into that building with the talent that is there. Now, of course, the concern with Kalen DeBoer is he's a small school kind of West Coast, Northwest kind of guy. We've talked about it. Coached at the NAIA level at a place called Sioux Falls. Not sure how many of you have watched a Sioux Falls game lately. Small school, NAIA in South Dakota. Won a ton of games there, by the way. Then he goes the FCS route, the Group of 5 route as coordinator, gets the Fresno State job. And of course, he's been at Washington over the last couple years. So is he ready for that spotlight that the Alabama coaching job puts on you? I don't know, but that is an interesting fit. And that's a name that seems to be very trending in the right direction. Much the same for Mike Norvell, by the way, from Florida State. And listen, I know Mike Norvell's kind of taken some strays over the last month because of what happened, ironically, with Alabama in the 4-team college football playoff. He's a good coach, though, man. This was a guy, year one was that COVID year. I think they went like 3-5, 3-6. Year two, 5-7. Year three, 10-3 a season ago. And then, of course, this year, 13-1, the only loss to Georgia in that, of course, that Orange Bowl that will never be spoken of again. I think he's an interesting candidate for a couple reasons. One, if he leaves Florida State, I pray in the social media streets that this guy does not leave Florida State, because that fan base might melt down. I'm very worried about the health of that fan base overall, but if they lose Mike Norvell, woo, it could get ugly at Florida State. I do think if they lose Mike Norvell, I think another question would just be, is all of their concern about the ACC and all of that validated? I don't know. It's something worth thinking about. It's something worth considering. Mike Norvell's name is very much in the mix at Alabama. And I also think, like, they are going to take a step back next year. Like, this was the year that Florida State was really built for. And it's a shame that Jordan Travis got hurt. It's a shame that we're not in the 12-team playoff era, because if we were, they would have gotten in. And if Jordan Travis was healthy, I think they could have done damage. We'll never know. But they lose a ton off this year's team. Keon Coleman, the quarterback Jordan Travis, Johnny Wilson, the other wide receiver, Jaheim Bell, the tight end, Jared Verse, on and on. So we'll see about Norvell. A couple other updates. One, we mentioned Lane Kiffin trending in the wrong direction. I think Dabo is too. I just don't get the sense that Greg Byrne, who's been very smart in his hires, I don't get the sense that Dabo's really a candidate. Trending in the wrong direction, stubborn, doesn't want to use the portal. Doesn't sound like the kind of guy that I would want to hire in 2024. D'Amico Ryan's a guy that I mentioned that first day. He loses in the playoffs with the Texans this week. You give him a buzz, see if he'd at least take the call. Now, I've heard mixed things. I think Greg McElroy was the one that said again that maybe there's some bridges burned with some former players, with, he doesn't like the treatment of some former players, and it doesn't feel like he's leaving the NFL after 1 year to come home to Bama. So we'll keep an eye out. By the way, one name that just I've seen a few times that I don't get, Mike Locksley, Maryland head coach. I don't think that'd be very good if that happens. I saw Chris Lowe mention him as a name in passing. I can't imagine that Mike Locksley, like I don't know that you can sell that to the fan base, to the board of trustees, etc. But we'll obviously keep an eye on this coaching job. I think something's going to happen quick, because you have to do something soon to keep this roster intact. All right, so what we're going to do, take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to wrap the show. I know it's all Nick Saban all the time here, but have you seen what's happening in college hoops right now? Insanity in the college hoop streets, as 4 of the top 5 teams lost since the last time we talked college hoops. Purdue, Houston, Tennessee, Kansas. Could UConn be number 1? Can Kentucky be number 2? Take a quick break. We'll be right back.